Yes, I'll do it again. I call to order the Europe, Eurasian, and Emerging Threats Subcommittee for this afternoon's hearing on the administration's budget proposal. For the coming fiscal year, the President has asked that Congress appropriate $50 billion for international affairs programs. Over $900 million has been requested for programs in the geographic jurisdiction of this subcommittee. This amount is much greater than what was sought just a few years ago, and I take this increased level of spending as an indication of our government's renewed focus on the region, especially in Eastern Europe. Increasing our efforts in that part of the world to grow diplomatic links and improve prosperity is a good thing. Yet, let me note that we are currently $19 trillion in debt, and we've added $1 trillion to that since this same hearing was held last year. And every dollar we use to help people of foreign countries places that much more of an additional burden on the backs of the American taxpayers and their children. All the government programs should meet a high standard, but foreign assistance, in particular, if it is to be given at all, must meet rigorous standards of accountability. Congress has a duty to scrutinize the President's request to make sure that it is responsible and that it properly supports our nation's priorities. During my time in Congress, I've participated in many hearings on assistance programs. I have always been proud of the generosity of the American people. They are willing to lend a hand to less fortunate people whom they have never met. That is certainly an admirable part of the American character, but at some point, generosity and responsibility have to go hand in hand. I've grown increasingly mindful to the limits of what America can afford and of what assistance dollars can actually provide. Today, we will discuss the effects of the ongoing war in Ukraine and the migration crisis and other factors at play in Europe. We will review our efforts and how we are coordinating with other international donors. Lastly, let me note there is a grave distinction between humanitarian assistance and development aid. Of course, we should be ready to respond to natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, and the like. However, development funds can't work if recipient countries do not undertake sound economic reforms. The role of government assistance is not to replace private investment. Private investment has to go hand in hand, or eventually we will fail to accomplish our goals. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions and extraneous material for the record. Hearing none, I so ordered. And with that, I turn to my ranking member, Mr. Gregory Meeks, for his opening statement.
I want to thank you, Chairman Rohrabacher. Thank you very much, first of all, for holding this hearing, to provide us an opportunity to examine the administration's 2017 budget request and our government's ability to execute our strategy in the region. When discussing our fundamental strategy for a Europe whole, free, and at peace, my attention is immediately drawn to the ongoing war in the Ukraine and in the country's struggle to reform its political economy. And while Russia continues to play a disruptive role in the region, I cannot stress enough the importance of the countries that are not in the spotlight in today's news cycle. Europe and Eurasia is, after all, a diverse region in terms of levels of political and economic development and of cultural and historical background. It has been a difficult year in our subcommittee's region as the rise of populism, migration, and acts of terror have put additional strain on an already limited budget. I am convinced that the work of our diplomats and aid workers in the field ensure that America's interests are being protected while bringing peace and prosperity to the region. The overall budget reflects a particularly urgent demand that, frankly speaking, may require more resources, in my estimation, when 2017 arrives. I'm referring to the situation in Ukraine and the economic tightrope the government is currently walking. Yes, the reform of the economy must be done by the Ukrainians themselves, following successive governments' failure to reform. But the new Ukrainian government will never be able to meet the rightful demands of its citizens without the West's economic and political support. With a closing political window, I want to make sure that we help a committed government get reform right. Not considering the Ukraine portion of the budget, however, we are left with a relatively small budget, given the myriad of concerns. A few weeks ago, this subcommittee hosted a lively hearing on progress and challenges in Turkey. Since the hearing, we have witnessed additional turmoil within our NATO allies' borders, not to mention the continuing humanitarian disaster in Syria. This is all related to the migration issue in Europe, which is of tremendous concern to me. Their path through the Balkans or Mediterranean is fraught with danger, yet integration into European society can also be very difficult. All of this is to say that there is plenty of urgent work to be done in this region in coordination with our EU partners. Yet, I ask, is the EU still attractive enough goal for the Western Balkan countries and Turkey? Meanwhile, in Central Asia, we face similar problems, but with different variables. As the Russian economy reels, citizens feel the combined effects of low oil prices, corruption, a non-modernized economy, and Western sanctions. As a result, scores of migrant laborers, many of them men, are returning home to Central Asia. They're not only to deal with the local economies rely on remittances as a significant source of income, but the economies may not be able to absorb the influx of labor. In these countries, having frustrated portions of society with nothing they can do to support their families, people will look towards more drastic options to express their despair. And finally, in the Caucasus, where USAID has been active in various programs in the diverse region, I would like to hear how the 2017 budget aims to address the problems that seem increasingly difficult. I'm referring to the backsliding of democracy and significant flare-ups in so-called frozen conflicts. As EU and NATO memberships become either less attractive or attainable goals in the medium term, our assistance there becomes that much more important. I realize that these conflicts are incredibly complicated and will not be solved in a day or two or even tomorrow. But I am a believer in diplomacy and would like to encourage dialogue through organizations like the OSCE. In conclusion, I look forward to discussing the proposed 2017 budget with our 4 colleagues here from the State Department and USAID. It is my goal as ranking member of this subcommittee to challenge, nudge, and encourage you all to make sure our dollars are being used to their fullest potential in a diverse region that is so important to our economic and political interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meeks. And today we have 4 people whose opinion on these issues are really significant. You are people we trust in your expertise enough to be overseeing these programs. And we're anxious to hear your views. And let me just note, but we're not anxious to hear them more than 5 minutes per person. And if you could sort of put the rest in the record and condense it to 5 minutes, that would be very helpful. Unfortunately, there may be a vote between now and the questions and answers, and let's hope we can get the witnesses through by that vote. First, we have, and again, with a name like Rohrabacher, I always forgive everybody for mispronouncing it, so please forgive me if I am mispronouncing your name. Elena Romanowski, is that it?
It's actually Alina.
Kalina.
Alina.
Alina, got it.
Romanowski was perfect, sir.
Okay, got it, okay. And Alina is a State Department coordinator for U.S. assistance to Europe and Eurasia, and in that role, she coordinates our assistance programs across multiple State Department bureaus and government agencies. previously served as Deputy Assistant Administrator, Deputy Assistance Administrator to USAID's Middle East Bureau, and held senior positions in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Next, we have Daniel Rosenblum. Got it. Is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Central Asia. From 2008 to 2014, he served as the coordinator for U.S. assistance to Europe and Eurasia. Before that, he held numerous positions of responsibility within the State Department before joining the executive branch, where as a legislative assistant to the executive branch right here in Capitol Hill. All right. Then Ms. Anne Marie Justice, tell me.
It's Yastashak.
All right. Yastashak. Got it. This USAID Assistance Administrator for the Asia Bureau. She is a career senior Foreign Service officer who has worked on behalf of our government around the world, overseeing programs focused on building the rule of law, democracy, and governance. Her postings, that is, included Burma, Georgia, and Ukraine. Wow, that's very tough, three tough assignments. Then Mr. Thomas Malia, right, got it, serves as USAID Assistant Administrator for Europe and Eurasia. He was confirmed in that role just this past December. Before then, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Prior to joining the State Department, he worked for Freedom House, the National Democratic Institute, as well as here on Capitol Hill for then Senator Patrick Moynihan. Thank you all, and we'll start from this end, and you may proceed, Ms. Romanowski.
Chairman Rohrabacher, Ranking Member Meeks, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today and for your personal investment in supporting our efforts to expand a Europe whole, free, and at peace, and a safer, more open Central Asia. Since I last appeared before the subcommittee, our partners in Europe, Eurasia, and Central Asia have made progress in key areas supported through our assistance. In Ukraine, Prime Minister Groysman raised gas prices to meet IMF requirements and passed critical reforms to strengthen judicial independence, shrink and modernize government bureaucracy, and reform the energy sector, which significantly limits the use of Gazprom as a political lever. In Moldova, we helped businesses move out from under Russia's trade barriers and toward free markets in the West. In Georgia, our support to populations around the administrative boundary lines has strengthened local economies and created jobs. And in Central Asia, civil society in the Kyrgyz Republic successfully pushed officials there to reject a draft foreign agent law. While the success of our assistance is significant and the map of free democratic Europe, Eurasia, and Central Asia remains incomplete, we continue to grapple with corruption, backsliding on democracy, suppression of media and civil society, ethnic tension, and protracted conflicts across the region. Given these challenges, your increases to the budget for this region have allowed us to meet urgent needs in countering immediate threats and helping countries move toward more prosperous futures. Our request for 2017 for the Europe-Eurasia region is $787 million, and for Central Asia, it's $164 million. Today, I will focus on Europe and Eurasia, and my colleague Dan Rosenblum will cover Central Asia. On Europe, we align our request with 4 strategic objectives. First, we're committed to supporting the sovereign choice of countries to determine their own political and economic destinies. That struggle is vividly illustrated in Ukraine, where Russia has sought to stymie its democratic rebirth at every turn. Since the crisis began, the U.S. government has committed over $1 billion in assistance for Ukraine. This includes over $600 million in security assistance, over $111 million for humanitarian efforts, and about $10 million for U.S. advisors. We've also provided the Ukrainian government with 2 $1 billion loan guarantees and signed a third agreement on June 3rd. To keep Ukraine's positive progress on track, we've requested $295 million for Ukraine, which will support the next phase of its anti-corruption reforms. Like Ukraine, we're also assisting Georgia and Moldova to pursue clean, democratic governance and closer ties with the European Union. Funding for Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine makes up 56% of our FY17 request. Of course, Europe as a whole remains susceptible to malign Russian influence, and its dependence on Russian energy leaves it particularly exposed. Energy diversification continues to be a key component of our strategy. In the Baltics and Central Europe, for example, critical projects have reduced energy vulnerability, including the opening of new LNG terminals in Lithuania and Poland. Our request for the Balkans includes about $154 million to help these countries complete their democratic journeys, integrate with Europe, and reduce their vulnerabilities to external pressures. With respect to our second objective, to combat corruption and build rule of law and accountable governance, our request will support independent judiciaries, increase government transparency, promote e-governance, and empower civil society. Toward our third objective, we're working to reverse the backsliding on democracy and attempts to close the space for political pluralism and public discourse throughout the region. Our request includes about $232 million for democracy programs. Regarding our fourth objective, U.S. assistance is playing an important role in addressing serious challenges to peace and stability across this region and within our own country. Our request includes $15 million for European Security Assistance Fund to help increase the defense capacity of key allies and partners, including $3 million for countering violent extremism in the Balkans. We must not forget, however, the importance of building bridges between people. In Russia in particular, we will continue to support direct engagement between Russians and Americans. For 25 years, our assistance to this region has been leading the way in tearing down walls, building lasting connections between peoples, and improving the lives of millions. Our request has been designed with today's tough budget climate in mind. We're committed to working diligently and effectively with the resources provided by the American people in the service of our values and our national interests throughout the region. I'll now turn to my colleague Dan Rosenblum to detail our Central Asia request. I look forward to your questions, and thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Meeks, Mr. Weber, thank you very much for the invitation to testify today, and I ask that the full text of my statement be included in the record. The U.S. has two fundamental national security interests in Central Asia. The first goes back to the breakup of the Soviet Union, when the U.S. set out to support the effort by the peoples of Central Asia to establish independent, sovereign states, free from undue external interference or intimidation. Our second primary interest is the stability of these sovereign and independent nations. We seek to prevent violence and the emergence of conditions that could result in states becoming havens for terrorist groups hostile to the United States. Those two key national security interests can best be achieved, we believe, by promoting security, prosperity, and good governance. That's the best recipe for long-term stability and for maintaining independence. And that's exactly the recipe supported by this budget request. Let me briefly review what we're doing in each of those three areas. Our security efforts focus on improving border security and strengthening the capacity of local security forces to counter terrorist threats. Our partners in Central Asia share our goal of disrupting the finance and recruitment efforts of Daesh and other international terrorist groups. Of course, our trainings and other security-related engagements always emphasize that violent extremism must be distinguished from peaceful acts of expression, assembly, association, and religious practice. We stress that stronger protections for basic rights and freedoms will make the countries of Central Asia safer and more secure, and by extension, make us safer and more secure. Our economic efforts are focused on promoting internal market-oriented reforms and economic diversification, as well as better connectivity among the Central Asian states and with their neighbors. Central Asia remains one of the least economically integrated regions in the world. What's more, the region's economy has been deeply affected over the past 2 years by Russia's negative economic growth and by low global commodity prices, leading to currency depreciation and a greatly decreased flow of remittances being sent home by migrant workers in Russia. These trends make the economic programming in this request more important than ever. We're promoting good governance in Central Asia through a variety of programs, including technical assistance to support internal reforms and the strengthening of independent media and civil society. We also know it's essential to address the deeply rooted problem of corruption, which not only contributes to potential radicalization, but also harms the vitality of the private sector. The recent creation of the so-called C5+1 diplomatic platform following Secretary Kerry's historic trip to all 5 states in Central Asia last fall could allow for unprecedented regional cooperation on issues of common concern. Secretary Kerry and the 5 Central Asian foreign ministers agreed to form working groups to address economic connectivity, environmental challenges, and security concerns, especially the threat of violent extremism. We're grateful that Congress provided explicit funding in its FY 2016 appropriation to support this platform with concrete regional projects. Mr. Chairman, I want to say, with respect to Central Asia's relations with its neighbors, that we do not see political and economic developments in Central Asia through the prism of a zero-sum game. This is a region where everyone can benefit from smarter security and trade that is inclusive, multi-directional, and rules-based. We think that when the countries of Central Asia look around for partners, they can and should choose as many as they wish. Finally, we think it's very important to recall that these are relatively young countries that are celebrating this year only their first quarter century of independence. The U.S. was one of the first countries to recognize the new states of Central Asia, and since then, our support for their sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity has been and will continue to be ironclad. If these governments can make a greater commitment to accountable, transparent, and inclusive governance, the dynamic nations of Central Asia stand to make tremendous gains in the coming decades, gains that will not only contribute to security and prosperity in the region, but also to our United States security and prosperity. I look forward to answering any questions members of the subcommittee might have about specific countries or specific programs, and I thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Chairman Rohrabacher, Ranking Member Meeks, Representative Weber, on behalf of the U.S. Agency for International Development, I thank you for this opportunity to testify today in support of the President's fiscal year 17 request for Europe and Eurasia. I would ask that the full text of my testimony be inserted in the record, and I'll just touch on a few high points. The Europe and Eurasia region is in part a tremendous success story about U.S. assistance, providing case studies of targeted aid that helped countries transition to free markets and democratic systems quickly. 12 countries have transitioned from receiving U.S. assistance and are now important U.S. partners and allies in the region and around the world. Yet the region's transformation remains incomplete. Progress is uneven in key areas, important achievements are at risk, and in a few cases we are seeing regression. In the Western Balkans, while there are key points of progress, Croatia and Slovenia have entered the EU, Montenegro and Serbia are in EU accession negotiations, and a stabilization and association agreement with Kosovo entered into force on April 1, other countries struggle. In addition, a troublingly high number of Western Balkan citizens have joined radical, violent Islamic extremist groups and traveled to conflict areas to join the fight. While the numbers have decreased in recent months, Bosnia and Kosovo remain among the top contributors on a per capita basis of foreign fighters traveling from Europe to Syria and Iraq. Stagnant economic conditions and high levels of youth unemployment, as well as Kosovo's continued isolation on the world stage, provide ripe conditions for radicalization. Through programs that help improve the economic prosperity of these countries and promote good governance, USAID seeks to address these drivers of violent extremism. The President's combined state and USAID request for the Balkans reflects a broad number of U.S. foreign policy objectives. Collaboration with host governments is real and significant in the Western Balkans, and U.S. aid and technical advice is highly valued. In Albania, bilateral assistance strengthens the country's justice sector, improves local governance, and helps civil society serve as a watchdog. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, our diverse program addresses the issue of radicalization. USAID initiated a 3-year program in 2015 that pilots new approaches to address youth disenfranchisement and enhance opportunities for young people to participate in community initiatives. This effort will be implemented in 6 at-risk communities where there is evidence that young people are being recruited as foreign fighters for Syria and Iraq. This project provides psychosocial support to youth deemed vulnerable to radicalization through trained and experienced teams of psychologists. In Kosovo, in addition to major efforts in energy security and economic growth, AID will continue to seek to move the country closer to membership in the EU and to normalize relations with Serbia. Our work in interethnic dialogue focuses at the grassroots, community level by helping people come together to recognize that their futures are intertwined. In Serbia, our assistance focuses on strengthening democratic institutions and the rule of law, reducing corruption, enhancing democratic and economic inclusion, supporting civil society, and increasing access to independent information. With $2 million in complex crisis funds, USAID Serbia also launched a program to mitigate the impact of migrants on local communities, which at its peak in 2015 was seeing upwards of 5,000 migrants per day transiting through Serbian municipalities. Just last month, I visited one such refugee facility outside Belgrade, run by the Vlade Divac Foundation, where our assistance helps improve crisis response coordination between the government and civil society service providers. The President's state USAID request for Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia will address urgent issues in a fraught region. In Armenia, our assistance will help alleviate disproportionate economic dependence on Russia, integrate Armenia into regional energy systems, and promote local governance initiatives. In Azerbaijan, we continue to look for opportunities to advance democratic and economic reforms and support civil society despite significant restrictions on our partners. In Georgia, we continue to work with the government and independent actors in civil society and the media to ensure that Georgia continues on the path to democracy and that the gains achieved to date are sustained. Finally, supporting Ukraine's comprehensive reform effort remains one of the agency's top priorities, and the President's FY17 state USAID request will allow us to continue that work, and we'll be building that out in partnership with Prime Minister Groisman, who is visiting Washington next week, meeting with AID Administrator Gail Smith and other senior administration officials. Ukraine is fighting a war on 2 fronts. Externally, Ukraine continues to combat Russia's aggressive actions. Our support also requires that Ukraine continue to battle against corruption, the internal enemy that has held Ukraine back for well over 2 decades. The U.S. has provided more than $1.1 billion in foreign assistance to Ukraine since the crisis began, as well as the 2 and now a 3rd sovereign loan guarantee that was signed on June 3. To support anti-corruption efforts, USAID has also deployed U.S. advisors and experts within several Ukrainian ministries. We've also been active in providing humanitarian assistance and addressing some of the mounting public health crises in Ukraine. In conclusion, I would just say that we must not forget that the countries of Southeast Europe and the former Soviet Union are still young states, working to build political institutions, regulatory and market frameworks, and institutional competencies required to access the capital and energy technology markets that will secure their futures. U.S. assistance, mostly technical or advisory, is critical to continued integration into the European and world systems. We must recognize that Europe is being tested, the continued flow of migrants and refugees, Russia's continued actions, and the growing potential of violent extremism gaining traction in the region. U.S. national security interests require sustained engagement in this region now more than ever. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to take your questions.
Chairman Rohrabacher, Ranking Member Meeks, and distinguished subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on USAID's role in advancing U.S. foreign policy goals in Central Asia. Before I begin, I ask that my full statement also be entered into the record.
So ordered.
Thank you. The FY 2017 budget request of $164.1 million for foreign assistance in Central Asia reflects an increased commitment to American engagement in this strategically important region and is crucial to its success. Central Asia is continually challenged by the influence of neighbors, broader regional threats, such as the violent extremism that exerts an increasing pull over a growing number of labor migrants and pressing development needs. Our request furthers USAID's mission to end extreme poverty and promote resilient democratic societies while also countering Russian pressure in Central Asia through increased funding to reduce dependence on Russia's economy and increase access to objective local news. Our request supports efforts to counter violent extremism by addressing its drivers with an emphasis on assistance to labor migrants. And the request supports USAID's efforts to address pressing development challenges in 3 main areas: First, increasing economic connectivity to create jobs and stronger country-to-country ties. Second, meeting urgent human needs of global consequence. And third, promoting stability through accountable and inclusive governance. First, on economic connectivity, offering little economic opportunity at home, the countries of Central Asia are some of the world's most dependent on remittances from abroad. To reduce this massive flow of migrant labor and contribute to a more stable, prosperous region, our assistance is encouraging domestic economic policy reforms that promote trade, attract investment, and create jobs. Under the new Silk Road and C5+1 initiatives, we are promoting connectivity on energy and trade. Second, we are meeting urgent health, food security, and environmental needs. On health, the region has come a long way with our assistance, yet Central Asia battles some of the highest rates of multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis in the world. USAID is working on multiple fronts to help the region reverse this trend, including with rapid testing technology from California. On food security, we're working through the Feed the Future initiative in Tajikistan to reduce poverty, undernutrition, and stunting. And we are helping the region's wheat growers adapt to more frequent droughts in addition to encouraging regional cooperation on water management. Third, we are promoting stability through accountable and inclusive governance. USAID is wide-ranging and tailored to each unique country context, from a robust array of democratic systems strengthening programs in the Kyrgyz Republic, a civil society and rule of law support for targeted groups in Tajikistan, and court system strengthening that is opening the door to greater rule of law exposure in Uzbekistan. I'll highlight key assistance areas in the 5 countries. In Kazakhstan, we partner to encourage further democratic reforms, improve health services, and food security. USAID's support contributed to the passage of access to information legislation last year that for the first time allows independent media to report on government activities. In the Kyrgyz Republic, the only democracy in Central Asia, our support contributed to parliamentary elections in October 2015 that international observers widely declared as credible, transparent, and accountable. USAID focuses on sustaining and strengthening the country's democratic processes heading into next year's presidential election. In Tajikistan, the poorest of the Central Asian countries, boosting agricultural productivity is essential to improving lives. FY 2017 funding will enable us to continue targeting a 20% increase in household farm income and a 20% reduction in childhood stunting. In Turkmenistan, one of the most isolated countries in the world, USAID supports Turkmenistan in participating more fully in the global economy through reforms and the introduction of international financial standards. We've provided training and study tour opportunities to Turkmen officials and civil society members to enhance their understanding of good governance principles. And finally, in Uzbekistan, we are expanding agricultural opportunities and promoting more responsive governments. Our request enables us to support Uzbekistan's limited number of NGOs operating in a challenging environment. Mr. Chairman, the countries of Central Asia face ever more complex challenges in charting their own course, making USAID engagement as vital today as it was 25 years ago at independence. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today and look forward to your counsel and questions.
Well, thank you to all of you, and just a few questions. Let's look at Kosovo, because you spent considerable time talking about Kosovo. It's been about over 20 years now, and we've played a dominant role in their government, in advising them and making them a priority for us in that part. Now you tell me that the Kosovo is the #1 country where foreign fighters for ISIL are being recruited. What does this say about our development system in that part of the world?
Well, I would say a couple things in response to that, Mr. Chairman. One is that Kosovo ranks high on a per capita basis. It's a small country with a small population, so it's on a per capita basis that they rank relatively high at the top of the scale in Europe, but of course there are countries in the Middle East and elsewhere that provide larger numbers and on a per capita basis as well. But it's a significant problem, nonetheless. It may be small in absolute numbers, but it's a problem anywhere that foreign fighters are being recruited.
Any guesstimate over the last 20 years what we've spent in Kosovo?
I don't have that with me today.
Okay.
I'd be glad to provide that to you later.
But it's a considerable amount of money, and it's probably more than, as you say, for any other country its size, is probably the highest level, wouldn't you say?
I believe it's relatively high, certainly on a per capita basis.
So let's just note that where we have been involved the most, we now have the highest recruiting level for those people who are getting involved in terrorism. Something's wrong. Something's wrong with that. I know Kosovo also has been the country in which has been the wonderful recipient of mosques provided by Saudi Arabia. Isn't that the case? So we're providing assistance and money and something to help them develop, which has not seemed to work. And Saudis provide mosques in order to train these people in radical Islam. That is something very, very wrong with that whole formula. I would think that, number one, again, it comes down to, should our aid be involved with humanitarian emergency aid, or should it be involved with development aid? And quite frankly, it doesn't sound, from what I have seen over the years, the development part of it is not a very successful element. Helping people whose lives are in danger because of Ebola or earthquake or a tsunami, that we've been good at, but this development doesn't seem to have worked. By the way, in terms of the refugees, how much are we now putting in? Can someone answer? How much are we putting into the refugees in Europe? How many millions of dollars, or hundreds of millions, or what are we talking about?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if I could also add, go back just briefly, if you
Sure.
permit me, to Kosovo and specifically our support. I will say that we are making progress, and many of the Balkan countries that do have foreign fighter challenges are taking on, are building countering violence extremism strategies, and they have started to take and enact some legislation. They've developed national security CVE strategies, and with our help they have, and in our budget for 2017, we do have about $3 million that we are going to put to help them support tackling that problem. They recognize they have a problem, and they want our assistance in helping it. So we are doing that. With respect,
Well, I guess spending all that money on strategies means that strategists get a lot of money. That's great.
and they are also going ahead and support and undertaking legislation that will allow them to go after the foreign fighters.
Let me ask you this. Have we given money to, I guess in Europe, it's the Interpol, specifically added to their money so they can track down terrorist organizations?
I will have to get back to you with the answer to that question about whether we specifically support Interpol, but I know that we do share information.
Yeah, it would seem to me that the development strategies that we've had in Kosovo, if you look at that, have not worked. We visited Kosovo last year. The young people continue to be unemployed with no hope of new jobs, and we end up with all of these mosques. But again, in terms of how much are we providing for humanitarian emergency assistance to the refugees in Europe, Western Europe?
If you may, we have at this point provided to UNHCR for humanitarian assistance to Greece, Western Turkey, and the Balkans. In 2015, we provided about $26.6 million, and this year, in 2016, about $41 million.
41 million. And that's going to what countries again?
It's going to UNHCR, the United Nations humanitarian
Right.
organization.
What countries do they provide money to?
Their support to, in this particular case, they're supporting Greece, Western Turkey, and the Balkans, as well as the rest of the world in humanitarian assistance.
Okay, and let's just note in this humanitarian crisis that is now being faced in Europe that these are basically Muslim people who are going into different cultures, and there are a number of Muslim countries who perhaps could be doing more for them. This is it's beyond me of how this thing's all going to play out in the end, but we do see with Kosovo that we've got a serious problem if people who are not in the Middle East are being recruited into these terrorist organizations. That's really worrisome. I will yield now to Mr. Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all four of you for your dedicated work, USAID, State Department. I think that the American public really doesn't understand the significance and the importance of the work that you do and how it integrates and helps us all move forward. So I just want to thank you for your service. Number one, it's very, very important, and we've got to figure out a way that we can let the American people know how important it is, because oftentimes, I guess, because they don't understand, when they hear about funding to the State Department and to foreign affairs, et cetera, they think that it's wasted money. I don't know of a better investment. But we need to have these dialogues so that we can understand and try to make sure that we break it down so that they understand why certain dollars go where and the significance of it. So, for example, I know when we talk about the OCO account, why we would want money to go there as opposed to the general budget or money that may be set aside for the DRG. In fact, when I was looking at the State Department's budget in 2015 for Europe and Eurasia budget, only 20% of that at the time was placed in the OCO account, and it looks like now that figure has grown to about 60%. So I'm just trying to understand, why would we move and go from 20 to 60?
If I can address that question, our level of commitment to each of our countries should be judged, I think, by the overall level of resources dedicated to supporting our strategy, and not necessarily specifically the breakdown of OCO versus base funding. This question of OCO and base funding was something that the department, it was part of a larger conversation between the Congress and the administration within the context of the 2016 budget. And in coordination, I think we have an agreement that our OCO funding will be targeted to areas impacted by the man-made crises as well, or natural disasters. So for our region, in Europe, this means allocating OCO to the frontline countries, such in crisis or are continuing in crisis, such as Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, which are not progressing as quickly and still need a lot of our support for the reforms they need to undertake. And for the Central Asia, it meant allocating OCO to the Central Asia Regional Program, which does address the regional integration of Afghanistan and countering Russian pressure. So we understand the difference, and we have an understanding that at the end of the day, our assistance will go to those countries that are that need it, and that we believe continue to need our assistance and also are making progress.
Thank you. And I think the other thing, again, when we talk about assistance and working together, maybe I ask Mr. Malia this: do we, and if we do, how do we coordinate with our European Union allies on assistance to countries in Europe and Eurasia? Is that so that we can make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck and we're working collectively together?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Congressman Meeks. In the 10 locations in the wider Eastern European region where we have offices or missions, we have regular consultation with other donors in country. We do that jointly with State Department colleagues at the embassies in those countries, and we work very closely to make sure that we're working in tandem with them. In those places where we have very, very small presence, like in Macedonia and in Albania in particular, I'm thinking of, we have struck interesting partnerships with European donors where they are putting money into some of the programs that we have designed and are implementing to enlarge them, to make them last longer or cover a wider swath of the country in enhancing agricultural production techniques or in supporting judicial sector reform in particular, I'm recalling. Just a couple of weeks ago, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the government of Romania to work together in assistance programs. And for them, that means largely in Moldova, one of the weakest countries out of the former Soviet Union, joining Romania. So we're working, and today we signed a specific agreement where they're joining us in an agricultural production project together. So we look for opportunities to leverage our small presence to enlarge it with others' contributions. I would say that our people in the field are very entrepreneurial that way and looking for ways to maximize the American investment.
Can you tell me, are there any countries within our subcommittee's jurisdiction that is being provided migration and/or refugee assistance, and why those countries as opposed to others, are there directly?
Well, the principal places that have been the focus of our limited efforts on helping communities and countries deal with the migration crisis were Serbia and Macedonia, which were facing the brunt of it. Macedonia, last year, we had a $3.5 million bilateral program as the foundation of our presence there. It's a very small presence. So in order to be able to deal with a sudden crisis like the migrant tide that washed in last year, we drew money from Washington, and this $2 million investment that went to Serbia and a smaller amount that went to Macedonia enabled us to finance local groups' efforts to provide social services to the migrants that were coming through, advising them on their rights, helping provide shelter. But the larger American investment in helping this has gone through our colleagues at the State Department's PRM Bureau, which has put money through the UN agencies, and I saw those UN agencies on the ground in Macedonia and in Serbia, providing those kinds of services under, with blue jackets and under multinational flag. But the U.S. is providing about a third, as I understand, about a third of the money that has gone into the UNHCR efforts in the Balkans in the last year or two.
Congress,
Yes.
if I could also add, we do have also ongoing programs that deal with border security and border control, and at the peak of the flow of the migrants, where those countries had no clue, how to deal with it, our presence of our INL and border collaboration was able to actually help those countries think differently on how they would have to address the flow and get a handle on it. So we have been very involved in providing the kinds of technical advice, technical assistance, and also just simply best practices that some of these countries, desperately needed at the time of the crisis. At this point, there are also some refugees who are left in some of those countries now that the borders are somewhat closed, and we will continue to respond to their, their interest in sort of how do we manage those migrants and refugees who are there, who are sitting there waiting for either going back or moving on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a few questions for the record my staff would like to ask, and then a couple of my own points. Could you give us an update on U.S. participation in Expo 2017 in Kazakhstan? Someone have any information on that for us? Will the U.S. and the U.S. companies be able to fully participate in that expo?
Mr. Chairman, I can respond to that. So as you may know, under current law, the Department of State can't spend appropriated funds on U.S. pavilions or major exhibits at international expos unless funds are expressly appropriated by Congress for that purpose. And as a result, as part of a longer-term effort to address this, in the 2017 budget request, where the State Department is actually proposing language to address that, to allow for funds to be spent towards international expos. But in the meantime, with respect to the Kazakhstan Expo, we are in a bit of a bind, I would say. You know that the last expo, which was in Milan, Italy, was a big success as a representational event. It got, I think, 6.1 million visitors came to the U.S. pavilion. But as a financial matter, it was not such a great success. The private sector partner who raised money for that expo didn't raise the necessary amount. And we're now working with that private sector partner to find a solution to the debt. But in the meantime, even though the Astana Expo will cost less than the Milan one did, without having strong financial commitments from the private sector, the Department of State can't confidently proceed to give the formal U.S. blessing to the pavilion. So we're still working with the government of Kazakhstan, also with the Departments of Commerce and Energy, to find a creative solution to this and find some way that we can, under existing legal authorities, we can have a presence there.
Thank you, thank you very much. My staff wanted that question answered, so there you go. And has the United States been able to sign new bilateral assistance agreements with Kyrgyzstan to replace the one that was abrogated last year?
I can address that as well.
Let's hear it.
So as you probably know, last summer our bilateral assistance agreement with Kyrgyzstan was unilaterally canceled by the government of Kyrgyzstan. It's important that we have this because without it, our assistance is subject to local taxation, which is against all U.S. policy. So it provides us a basis for helping Kyrgyzstan in a variety of ways that we're not able to do right now. Secretary Kerry's visit there in the fall was sort of a turning point, and I think our relationship is in a much better place today and much
Headed in the right direction, as we're saying now?
Yeah, it's headed in the right direction, and we're talking intensively about getting a new agreement in place, and we hope to have it.
Okay, I just noted that we have 15 minutes before the vote. Before the vote is over, and I will finish up my questioning here. Mr. Meeks will have his. We'll see if whatever we can squeeze out, but this hearing will be adjourned at 5 minutes till the time that we have to go over and vote. So there you go. I'm a little concerned about what role did we play in making sure that the Lithuanians have their LNG facility? Did we have any government money involved in that?
Congress, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to get you a response to the record, but my understanding is that we did not have any resources for that. It was but I will get you
Let me just note
answer
that
for the record.
when we're talking about, and we have people here as representatives of our government talking about how we are involved with, or we're in some way promoting these things, at some point I would hope that we start trying to improve relations with Russia rather than trying to hit them in the face. I mean, I just over and over and over again, I'm part of the testimony today, and it's a policy of our government, which you reflect, which is a hostility towards Russia that is driving us away from each other. And every time there's something we can do that will undercut them economically or undercut them in some way in their relationship with people around, it would be as if Russia would come in and do something with Mexico to try to make sure that we couldn't work with Mexico or something. These are hostile acts as far as I'm concerned, and I know my colleagues disagree with me on that. Mr. Meeks may or may not disagree with me on that, but I think, what do we do? Do we still fund these people-to-people exchanges with Russia? Aren't we at least doing some of that?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we are, and in fact, we are planning on continuing and have requested funds in our 2017 budget to be able to continue to engage with people-to-people exchanges and programs between Americans and Russians who would like to engage. And we've been very open about our engagement with Russia. We've consistently pointed out that the United States and Russia should continue to work together on a range of issues that affect our national security concerns. We're also frank when we disagree, as I'm sure you know, whether it's on Ukraine or on the treatment within Russia of their civil society, political opposition, or journalists. So but we do believe that it is important that we maintain the people-to-people contacts. They've been invaluable, and we have requested resources.
And let me note, I was the head of a CODEL. This is our committee oversees relations with Russia as well as Europe and Central Asia. We recently headed a CODEL to Russia. It was about a few months ago, and we were the first CODEL there in the last 3 years. There are incredible implications to this continued roll towards making things more hostile and more hostile and more hostile. You have pictures of Russian planes buzzing our ships. Of course, no one noted when they said that where that ship was located, which is 26 miles from St. Petersburg. And yeah, it was international waters, but that would be the equivalent of sending a missile delivery system boat of Russia off of Catalina Island, which is 26 miles off of my shoreline. I think we need to really pay attention to try to be peacemakers where we can, rather than this incredible hostility that could lead us to war, which will be a catastrophe for the world. And with that said, Mr. Meeks, I'll give you the last word on that, and then we'll adjourn.
Thank you. Let me just say, one of the things I do agree with you on is that people-to-people contact is tremendously important. I think that we need to fund it, and I think that is important. But let me just then defer with you when you talk about aggression on our side. It wasn't the United States that invaded eastern Ukraine. It wasn't the United States that, when they talk about Georgia and other countries in the region. So when you talk about aggression, it seems to me that the aggression is coming from the other side. It takes two to tango. And I know that this president and this administration was doing everything it could to try to improve those relationships. So, and we've talked about, against, quite frankly, some of my colleagues, not Mr. Rohrabacher, but on the other side, he was being criticized for doing it early on in his administration. And so but it takes two to tango. And clearly, if I look at the aggressive part, especially military aggression, that's not on us. That's on them. The question that I want to, I guess the final question that I want to ask is the current and the future shape of the European Reassurance Initiative. I know that the president is asking, or is going to be asking, to quadruple the ERA this year. But I just want to know, do we know how that money will be distributed? I just want to, because there's become some issue on the distribution or how the money will be distributed, and if we're going to increase it. I just, for my edification, would like to know if there's a plan on how that will operate.
Congressman Meeks, I will have to get back to you on the exact details, because, as you know, the European Reassurance Initiative is also a very large Defense Department program, and how it will all break down, or the things, is still under a lot of discussion, and we can get back to you with the details on that.
Okay, that'd be great, because I think that would help, especially as we're reviewing on our side. We know how the money's being spent and why, and I think it helps us when we want to explain it to the American people also, and how it's at our advantage, and especially when you're talking about the increase therein. So with that, I know we've got votes, Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to miss these three votes that we've got coming up. So I will yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me know, my ranking member is right. We weren't involved. When Russia was involved in those, we weren't involved in that with them. We were too busy in the Dominican Republic, Panama, Grenada, and helping Somoza and all these other dictators that we've been helping, and then invading their country when they were overthrown. Yeah, Reagan did it. Listen, I was there with Reagan too. But the bottom line is that this is not there. We do some of the same things that we are condemning the Russians for, and I do not have a double standard on that. And I think communism was the greatest evil in my lifetime, and I'm proud that we defeated it. but that Russia is no longer the Soviet Union, and we should be trying to aim at peace with them and reconciliation, rather than beating them down every time we have a chance. So with that said, this hearing, and thank you for your work, and my door and the ranking member's door is always open. If you have some things you'd like to talk over with us, I'm open to you. So please take advantage of that offer. And with that said, this hearing is now adjourned.